What is the ideal condition to go fluke fishing? Tide, drift speed. This is early.
For bucktailing?
For bucktailing at this time of year.
So definitely the magic window I find is the first push of current. You want to, there's two components. One is when the current's changing, and the other is what is your drift going to be like. So you do want to drift, but you don't want to drift too fast. So the ideal speed is usually around a half a knot to a knot. That in that window is a good speed. You get much faster than that. You have to get a little more skilled with your ability to cast and whatnot. But most people can fish very effectively within that drift speed. Also, the slack water can be quite slow, but there's a magic window that tends to happen right when the current gets moving, which we're about to go into right now, actually, on this particular trip. So we'll see what happens here. But all of a sudden, you'll go from a very slow pick to they just get enough current flow and they just turn on. And they might turn on for 15 minutes, they might turn on for an hour, you don't know. But there's something about that window. Sometimes it might slow down a bit in the peak of the current, but just be patient, because there's also tends to be a window at the end of the current as well. So I like to, if I had to choose my magic time, I would find that tide change. I would look at my wind. So if I had a west wind here with an outgoing tide, I would try to hit the first of that outgoing, something like that, and that way I had a good drift and that first movement of current, and that's the best way to maximize your odds here.
One more question. Bottom structure. What would be the ideal type of bottom structure? I mean, we have a pretty flat area here, I believe. But what kind of bottom are you looking for the most part?
So for us, I'm going to speak about this area, because every area is different, right? And you need to know your area, and that's another big thing. Just because you do it one way, say on the South Shore or the Western Sound or whatever, know your local area and pay attention to how it's working locally. So what we do here may not work well on certain areas like Montauk with different bottom structure, different currents, tides, conditions. So here, this time of year, it's all about the bait and the sand eels up on the flats. This is where the fluke congregate. They move up out of the deep and they come up onto the shoals to chase the sand eels. So light tackle up on these flats, the sand bottom. It's nice fishing. You can get away with a ½ ounce to an ounce bucktail. So you want to look for bait and focus on these shoal areas. In this particular area, this is May and June mostly into sort of mid-July, and then it starts to thin out once it gets too hot. But the shoal areas are our best. Later on, after they push off the shoals, you can target more of the deeper slopes, rock piles, hard bottom, wrecks, that sort of thing.
Ideal conditions for fluke. Well, first of all, wind and tide going in the same direction. Light wind and enough tide so that you're moving along at maybe about 1 knot is best. I do a lot of fishing in a kayak from a Hobie kayak, and I actually don't mind the days when there's a very light current and no wind, because I can sort of power drift under my own power, and I've done very well on days like that. The worst thing of all I find is too much wind. Specifically in the kayak, I will put a drift anchor out or a drift chute to slow my drift down.
I actually like the start of outgoing water in most places, especially for big fish. I like the slower stages of the tide. Reason being, I like to fish lighter tackle. It helps me get down to the bottom a little better. And also on that slower stage of the tide, you can cover less ground and be very particular about where you're dropping your baits.
Up here on the North Shore, I like the outgoing water in the summer. We have predominantly southwest winds, so an outgoing current with a southwest wind gets your drift going. We do run into a problem where the drift gets too quick and the bucktails, which I prefer to use, come off the bottom, so it's constant cast and reset. So a drift chute to slow your drift down works really well in those conditions.
Down on the South Shore, around the bays and inlets, the last of the incoming, usually the best part of the tide, brings that cooler ocean water in. If you have no drifting conditions, you can still catch fish by casting around the area, casting towards the edges of sandbars, and you can still be very effective. The fish will still feed through slack water, just a matter of keeping your lure moving. If it's too windy and the drift is too fast, a sea anchor. If you don't have a sea anchor, sometimes even a bucket and midships will slow you down enough to give you a good drift.
What's the answer? What's the pat answer that you give?
As long as it's moving to start with, work from there. I grew up saying it was the incoming. Always had to fish the incoming with Fluke, but I've come to find you can get them, location specific. Incoming, outgoing. Again, really the big thing is to have some water movement, so you don't have to just rely on imparting the extra action on your bait, your jig, your lure.
I think we got one back there. It's funny. I always tell people because they say what's best tide, and I'll say the same with all of us in a schedule, with our business schedule or work schedule. It's like whenever you can get out, you make the most of it. Like an early season where I fish in Little Lake Harbor, Great Bay, when that early season bite starts in May, the incoming tide is bringing a lot of cold ocean water. So a lot of times the incoming tide turns the bite off. Meanwhile, the high tide on the outgoing, those fish stack up sometimes outside of a creek mouth, for example, and they're waiting for everything to flow out of the creek. So then that's your best tide. A few weeks back, I was out with my dad, and we had south wind going, southeast or southwest wind. So the best tide was the outgoing because that's where we're working a flat. So I don't think there's ever any real answer.